The following news flash is brought to you by the Lone Star Lowdown, providing your daily bulletins for the commodities market. Today in history, news updates, and the inside scoop into the tides of the alternative. Markets for Wednesday, the 20th of April, 2016, are currently trading with gold at $1,253.14 an ounce, silver $17.14 an ounce, Texas crude $41.08 a barrel, and Bitcoin is currently at about 440 U.S. currency. Today in history, the year 1999. The Columbine High School shootings take place in Colorado. 13 people were killed, with 24 being injured. The Columbine shootings took place today in history. In recent news, Treasury Secretary Jack Lew is expected to announce later today that Harriet Tubman, the African-American abolitionist most famous for her role in helping slaves escape through the Underground Railroad, will soon be the new face on the $20 bill, with the U.S. founding father Alexander Hamilton remaining on the $10 paper note. The new $10 bill is set to be unveiled in 2020. The timing for the production of the new Harriet Tubman $20 bill, however, is yet to be announced. More than a dozen criminal charges have been filed today against 3 officials in Michigan as part of a months-long investigation into the lead-contaminated water crisis in Flint. The charges are the first from the government catastrophe, which has potentially exposed roughly 100,000 residents to lead-contaminated water. As a result of this, which many are calling criminal negligence, the crisis has led to an investigation of the possible links between the tainted water and a dozen deaths from Legionnaire's disease. In 2015, local, state, and federal authorities through the Drug Enforcement Administration's controversial cannabis eradication program uprooted roughly 4.1 million cultivated marijuana plants in all 50 states, as compared to the 4.3 million plants in 2014. While federal spending on the program has remained roughly the same at $18 million in the last few years, it tallies out to roughly $4.42 per plant. This DEA's program provides funding to 128 state and local law enforcement agencies to search for, seize, and destroy marijuana being grown across the country. Much of the money for the program comes from the Justice Department's highly controversial and constitutionally questionable asset forfeiture fund. However, at least 2 states have declined to accept federal eradication funds last year, Alaska and Colorado, where marijuana is now legal. 4 states, including even the District of Columbia, have legalized marijuana for adult use, with several other states hoping to follow smoke this year. With an ever-growing opposition from researchers, lawmakers, doctors, and the general public calling on the federal government to change course on marijuana policy and save us all some money. This is Rick Brody with your lowdown for 4/20/2016.
Good evening and welcome here on this Thursday evening, the 21st of April, 2016. It's time for INN World Report Radio now on the Great Logos Radio Network. My name is Tom Kiley, and because of you all, or y'all, whichever way you want to say it, I have the honor to bring this program to you on Thursdays and Tuesday nights as well, here over, like I said, the Great Logos Radio Network. And it is a very special show tonight. I like to think they're all good and special in their own way. They're all special. And however, tonight, very, very happy to have, for the first time on the radio side of INN World Report, we've had this gentleman on the television side way back in 2003, right before the horrible, ill-fated, murderous invasion of Iraq. But it's the first time that I've had the opportunity to bring him on to talk with you, the INN World Report listening audience, the INN World Report radio listening audience. And then by that, I mean, or by who am I talking about? I'm talking about Scott Ritter, former U.S. Marine Major, I believe, and UNSCOM inspector, worked at the United Nations as a weapons inspector. He is the man who, and not by himself, but in large measure, I think he directed a lot of the effort, was the person who was very heavily involved in the disarmament of Iraq's weapons of mass destruction between the First and Second Gulf War. So if you have ever wondered about the weapons of mass destruction, the lie that we were told that Saddam still had them and he was going to kill everybody in the world with them and he was going to attack you in your hometown with them. And if you ever wondered how come that lie was a lie, how come they didn't find any weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, it's largely due to the efforts of our guest tonight, Scott Ritter. He will be joining us in about 25 minutes or so. So he'll be here at the bottom of the first hour. So I urge you to, it's one of those evenings where, pull up a chair, make some popcorn, get the kids, come around the radio, call Aunt Sadie and Uncle Joe and, let them know because it'll be a great show. And Scott is a New Yorker. He's from the Albany area, I believe. I think he lives up that way now. Upstate, we call it, down here in Brooklyn from where I am coming to you from. And he was recently, actually last weekend, he was in New York City with the great Ray McGovern, who was also on the show only last Thursday night, a week ago tonight. And the two of them spoke as guests of Mark Crispin Miller, another great New Yorker who we've had on the show several times, professor of media studies at New York University, just an incredible New York City activist. I've been proud to say that I've worked with Mark Miller through INN now since 2001, where, we've put different events together. I mean, Mark's put a lot of events together, and sometimes INN has put some events together, and we've collaborated, and he's had just incredible events that he's had speakers come and edify everybody in attendance. He was heavily involved in the theft of the 2000 election. Very, very eloquent, very dedicated. I guess he's got tenure because I'm surprised he still has his job at NYU. But hey, what do you want to say? So anyhow, Mark Miller invited both Scott Ritter and Ray McGovern to speak at a famous institution that we have here in Greenwich Village in New York, just south of Washington Square Park. As a matter of fact, when you walk out, I think it's on Sullivan Street. You turn, if you look to the left, you can see straight up the street right into Washington Square Park, and it is on the axis. You're looking directly under the arch, Washington's arch there. So it's very interesting. And by the way, I think Bernie Sanders had something like 28,000 kids there, mostly kids, cheering him on about 2 weeks ago. That was a big deal. And they spoke there. Now, they were talking, both gentlemen, both Scott and Ray, were talking about the Democratic candidates' foreign policy positions. So they were talking about both Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton and the whole nine yards, not what you're getting on the, not the ignorance that you get in the mainstream media. And, Bernie had some real problems as well, but the huge problems were with Hillary Clinton. You've probably heard me say it many, many times on the show, and I'll be saying it several times tonight, I'm sure, when Scott joins us again as well. It was one of my proudest moments being involved in the alternative media. INN was a relatively new show, young group back in those days. This was in early 2003, the run-up to this murderous invasion of Iraq. Totally innocent the people of Iraq were, as bad as their ruler may have been. Had nothing to do with 9/11. They were trying to tell us that they did. Had nothing to do with making enriched yellow cake uranium, using yellow cake uranium to make weapons. We know that was a lie. Valerie Plame got outed over that. Her husband has been on this program to talk about that, and on INN as well. The former ambassador, the name escapes me at the moment. I'm sorry because I'm more excited. And then I think it was March. We'll get the date from Scott. He'll remember, I'm sure. But probably within a month of the invasion, Scott was on a book tour trying to tell everybody, no, it's wrong. There are no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. I cleaned that country out. And he was not getting a lot of attention in the big media, but we had him on INN, on our national television show. We were on the Dish Network satellite system. So yours truly, our effort, I should say, collectively at INN, was able to pull that off. And I'd like to tell you, friends, that we did it on a zero budget. But that would not be the truth. We did it on a negative budget, okay? We just dug into our own pockets to put that show out all the time. It wasn't like we were getting money and spent it all and we had a zero budget. No, we were at a deficit. So the corporate media, that has just gazillions of dollars, and all of these talking heads like Rachel Maddow and Megyn Kelly and all the rest of them, who are all getting six-figure salaries, to be sure, maybe even more than that, I don't know. But all right, they didn't get this. They didn't, because they didn't want to get it. And the big story, they had a lot of fascinating points that they discussed with us. But a major point that Scott Ritter brought up was, as a fellow New Yorker, Hillary Rodham Clinton at the time was our senator. And he wanted to speak with her about this, the fact that this was a lie, the weapons of mass destruction ruse that was being foisted on us. And so he tried making appointments with her staff. They knew who he was. They knew what he wanted to talk about. And Hillary Clinton would not let him in, would not let him speak, because she wanted to vote for it, I believe. I don't see any reason why she wouldn't speak with somebody that important about such a life and death matter for 1 million plus Iraqis now. But she did not want to have it on the record that she knew it was a lie because she had been told definitively. All right. That's my opinion. And now she says she regrets having done that vote, la, la, la. So that was a big piece of information that Scott Ritter had to share with us about Hillary Rodham Clinton. I'm sure he'll do it again tonight. So that's what we got coming up. Let's open up the phone lines, 512-646-1984. You can get right through, 512-646-1984. And Scott Ritter coming up in about 15, 18 minutes or so. It's going to be really wonderful. This is what's the proper grammar? Maybe we have a teacher out there listening. An heroic person, or yeah, I would think that's probably the way you say it. This is an heroic person. Surely I could say this person is heroic in my mind. I don't know how you feel about it, but Scott Ritter was no friend of Saddam Hussein during the run-up to the, I should say, in the aftermath of the first Iraq War, when he and UNSCOM was tasked with disarming Iraq of weapons of mass destruction. I used to see him on the cable news shows a lot. They would love to have him on, and he'd be talking about, well, we got the trailer trucks pulled up at the front, to haul away everything, and he won't let us in. He's got all these palaces everywhere, and he won't let us in, and we're waiting for hours in the sun, and our satellite pictures show us that they got a bunch of trucks going out the back door. He's playing games with us. He would be telling people, and the talking heads on the cable news networks were great. Oh, they just couldn't wait to have him on and say stuff like that. But then when he came back, and 1 second. When he came back right before the second invasion of Iraq, nobody wanted to talk to him, because the corporate media's job is to sell the lies to all of us. That's what they do. That's why they make the big bucks. I just saw a piece, Scott Creighton, the great guy who puts out American Everyman, willieloman.wordpress.org. If you don't go there every day, I don't know why. You should. He's got great stuff. And we haven't had Scott on the show for a while. I'll see if I can get him back on. But he just put up a great article. It was in the Huffington Post. It's something like only 6% of Americans now feel like they're getting good news and information from the corporate media. How about that? So crazy, right? 1 second. So that's only like 2% higher than Congress, I think, or something. So yeah, it's fortunately people are waking up, as they say. I like to think the alternative media has an awful lot to do with that. 512-646-1984. What do you all think? And it's just, there's this big reality shift now. It's just too big. It's too big to cover anymore. This ain't the way it's supposed to be working in the first quarter already. Almost, we're more than halfway through the first quarter of the 21st century. And it ain't supposed to be working like this, friends. Not at all. Okay. We're going backwards. We, the people, are going backwards on just about every measure. Except, you know what? We probably have real cool, neat, high-tech gadgets now. We're going forwards in that. And our cars are fancier. Okay. So we're going forward in that. But by so many other measures, the affordability of healthcare, college education, indebtedness, wars all over the world, killing people everywhere, and in our share of the pie versus the 0.1%, all backwards. We'll be right back. Scott Ritter coming up right after.
You are listening to the Logos Radio Network, LogosRadioNetwork.com.
To England or France, may like to gamble, might like to dance, maybe the heavyweight champion of the world, but you got to serve somebody. Hey, you gotta serve somebody. Maybe the devil
All right, good friends, welcome back. Tom Kiley here, INN World Report Radio. I'm excited. Scott Ritter's going to be on the show, the radio version of INN for the first time. He's been on our television side at least one time that I can recall. And so this is going to be good. A real heroic person, heroic American, but I think his service goes well beyond that of the United States. I think he serves humanity. Like I said, no heroes, no friend of Saddam Hussein, but he called it like he calls it like he sees it. We'll get into that a little bit, I think, with Scott, but just very patriotic and to not just America but also humanity. I was so impressed with the way he talked about, the hell that was going to be unleashed and was in fact unleashed on the Iraqi people, innocent people. This is not American values, friends. This is not what we're supposed to be about. All right. Is it a matter of intelligence? Are we that stupid and dumbed down now that we can just allow ourselves to be scared into murdering people or having our military just destroy people who had nothing to do with nothing? What is this? This is un-American. I don't know. Maybe it was American back in the days of slavery or something. I don't know. Maybe it was American back in the early days before this country was founded, when the Europeans came in here and they were all handed guns and they were told to, clear the land of the indigenous people. Maybe it was back then, but we weren't even a country back then. That was more, the will of the British oligarchy. But somewhere along the line, we got our independence. We stayed out of European affairs to a very great degree. And, then we got into the empire game. But it's certainly not the propaganda that we've been sold about how great we are and how special we are and how exceptional we are. World War II, saving the world, all the rest of it. Is that who we really are, friends? Are we really like bloodthirsty people, like the people who just, wipe out the people of Gaza? Is that what we are now? Do we not care about Iraqis because they're Iraqis? And that we should just, come in there and bomb them? They had nothing to do with 9/11. Not a threat to us. Maybe a threat to Israel. Well, that's a different story. Why don't we talk about that? The neocons that run the show. You got to be a Zionist to be a neocon, last I checked. And I got to tell you, friends, it looks like our foreign policy resembles a Zionist foreign policy a hell of a lot more than any kind of an American one, at least in the Middle East. In Central Asia. That's what it looks like to me. It looks a lot more like Israel's foreign policy than ours. Are you all down with that? Just like bombing Iraq, and we didn't even get an oops or an I'm sorry, Oh, I'm sorry. We really thought you had those weapons of mass destruction. Oh, can you give us a mulligan on that? Gee, I'd like a do-over. A million or so dead people later. Innocent people, children. I mean, what's it like to be a child? What's it like to be a child whose town has been selected to have shock and awe visited upon it? And all the kid knows is that stuff that's coming down, this frightful destruction and noise and death and carnage. And is he going to live or die? Is his mother and father going to live or die? His brothers and sisters? His house? All he knows is it was made in America. That's you and me, stamped made in America, and we're supposed to be in control of our government, and this is happening. Are you all down with that? I'm not. It's bad enough when civilians are involved in a war, when every effort is made to, keep them out of it. Anyway, what do you think? 512-646-1984. People are getting disgusted. People are getting fed up around the world. There's an insurrection going on, and it came through New York last Tuesday night during the show. We had our primary. And fascinatingly, on the Republican side, Donald Trump won every single county in New York State except one, Manhattan, the island of Manhattan, where Wall Street is. All right. That's the only county he lost, and I think he got half the delegates of that anyway, or almost one of them out of there. He got something like out of 90. I think he got every one of our delegates. He got 92, I think, out of 95. John Kasich, I keep calling Kucinich, I guess wishful thinking. Kasich got Manhattan. This creep who's still in the race. He's won one state, his home state, and he still kills. I balanced a budget when I was in Congress. I balanced a budget, and I had to work. With Republicans and Democrats, and I'm as a governor, I balanced a budget. yeah, it's important to have a balanced budget, but it's, come on. The problems nowadays, how are you going to bring the middle class back, Johnny? Nobody has any faith in you. You only won your own state. Just bow out, get out of the way and let the rest of the voters select between Ted Cruz and Donald Trump. Now, y'all in Texas, listen, and you tell me, Donald Trump got every single New York county but Manhattan. Only one county in our entire great big state. It's a good state. It's a big state. A lot of people, right? Did Ted Cruz do that well in Texas? That's his state. Did he win every county but one in Texas? I don't know. Just asking. Y'all are down there. 512-646-1984. Somebody give me a ring. I mean, I'm sure I could dig it up. Unbelievable. And then on the other side, the Democratic side, Hillary Clinton, she managed to pull off a life-saving victory, it looks like, but I don't even know because I think they got to look into it. There's an investigation now in New York on voting and what happened. All right. There's an investigation. In my county alone, Kings County, Brooklyn, 63,000 with a T, 63,000 people, Democratic voters, were kept away from the polls because they screwed up in their registration stuff, documentation, information. 63,000 in one county. And you also have a situation where, it's a very restrictive, party affiliation bit here, Democrat, Republican. If you switch, Donald Trump's kids can't vote for him because they switched over and they found out that you have to do it more than a year in advance before you can vote for the other party. That's crazy. The party is forcing you to vote the party. How do you even know who's going to be the candidate a year and a half? Deb, do we have this caller ready to go? Because I think there's only now there's another one. We're going to run out of time. I don't know if I'm allowed. All right. Well, I see there's a couple of callers lined up, but we only got about a minute and a half left in this segment. Then Scott Ritter's coming on. Okay, let me hurry up and get to. Oops, she looks like she just dropped off though. Hold on. Oh yeah, here we go. All right, let's go to Fancy first. Hi, Fancy. I'm sorry, we got about 1 minute. Shoot.
Okay. Well, I was listening to Bev Harris, who made the Black Box Voting organization.
A great friend of INN. Yeah, we've worked with her for years. I'll have to get her back on probably because your recommendation. What'd she say?
Well, she said that even though there is corruption and it's really, really bad, you should still vote because voting shows the plausibility of certain people getting elected or not. So, if the plausibility is way off, you can still make people understand that the vote was corrupt, and that's part of waking people up.
I agree. I think that if you're disgusted with the candidates, that's fine. Vote for me. Vote for your dog, but vote. What would happen if the majority of people wrote in somebody else's name?
Well, she says that if you write somebody else's name and you don't, if they're a candidate and you don't color the little oval next to their name, they won't count it.
Yeah.
She was really good. She said a lot about the whole thing, but I wanted to say that Scott Ritter really influenced me a lot when I was first learning about 9/11 because I heard him say they didn't have weapons of mass destruction.
Great. He's going to be on the show. We'll get Bev Harris back on.
Did you know the majority of businesses in the U.S. are family-owned? We're not just talking mom-and-pop stores, but companies at the very top of the corporate ladder. I'm Dr. Catherine Albrecht, back with the top family businesses next.
Privacy is under attack. When you give up data about yourself, you'll never get it back again. And once your privacy is gone, you'll find your freedoms will start to vanish too. So protect your rights, say no to surveillance, and keep your information to yourself. Privacy, it's worth hanging on to. This message is brought to you by StartPage.com, the private search engine alternative to Google, Yahoo, and Bing. Start over with StartPage.
When it comes to business, blood and money really do mix. A whopping 8 out of 10 American businesses are family-owned. They contribute nearly 60% of the nation's economy and employ nearly 2/3 of the U.S. workforce. Many of the firms in the S&P 500 are family-controlled, and they're doing great. They're more stable, and they inspire more commitment and trust in their employees. The biggest family-owned business is, surprise, Walmart. Next comes Ford, Cargill, Koch Industries, Carlson Companies, Comcast, and News Corp. Rounding out the top 10 is the sweetest of them all, Mars. M&M's, anyone? I'm Dr. Catherine Albrecht for StartPage.com, the world's most private search engine.
Looking for some truth? You found it. LogosRadioNetwork.com.
listeners, welcome back. Tom Kiley, INN World Report Radio, every Tuesday and Thursday night here on the great Logos Radio Network. And, as you know, if you're a longtime listener to the program, or not even a longtime listener, you've heard me mention this man's name many times. I am in incredible admiration of Scott Ritter and his service to not just the United States of America, but to humanity. And he's an inspiration. We just had Fancy on the line before that last break, and she said the same thing, that Scott Ritter has inspired her over the years. And that's who's with us right now for the first time on INN World Report Radio. He's been on our television side, but let's welcome Scott Ritter. Scott, thank you so much for your service in the Marines and beyond, and UNSCOM and so forth, to humanity, to the United States. And thank you so much, and welcome to INN.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Scott, we spoke at length for the first time. I don't know that I was there in the studio that time when you came to INN. And I'd like to date that, by the way. I think I have a good idea. Last Sunday. And I felt like I was talking to an old friend. I felt like I was talking to somebody who, you come through very, very clearly, and because there's this very strong basis of truth, I think, and that's what we're trying to work on. So I want to thank you for that. And also, if we could, before we get started, do you have an idea? I believe it might have been even March of 2003 when you were with us in our Tribeca studio on our television side. It probably was within about 6 to 3 weeks of the invasion of Iraq. Do you remember that time?
Yeah, it was prior to the invasion. It was either late February, early March of 2003. I remember it was about the same time that I was attending the Brooklyn Book Fair. So and the weather was a little nippy. So I think you're right. It was probably early March.
Right. So there you have it. And while we're still on that subject, before we move on, Scott, I remember seeing you. And I characterize it as you being the darling of then back in the 90s and early aughts, I suppose. Cable television was really starting to take off, and they seemed to have you on a lot. I don't know, every time you came back to the States, and they were using you to say Saddam bad, that sort of thing. And you were giving us reports about the difficulties that you were running into disarming Iraq. And number one, number two, I don't recall them asking you back though when you had the news that it had been mission accomplished. Is that an accurate perception?
It is. I wouldn't quite say that I was the darling of the cable news networks, because that implies some sort of, good feeling towards one another. Not that I have any animosity towards the news, but, I was brought on, to be more or less a punching bag, whether it was CNN, whether it was MSNBC, whether it was Fox News. The whole purpose of putting me on was so that I could present my side of the story, and then in the next segment they would bring up, the 3 to 5 talking heads, none of whom had any experience in weapons inspection in Iraq or even the intelligence business, and they would just tee up what I was saying and proceed to knock it out of the proverbial ballpark. Except all they were doing is endorsing half truths or outright falsifications or misrepresentation. I do know that when I go back on occasion and reread the transcripts, I'm very proud of every show I ever did, because the transcripts sort of withstand the test of time.
Well, that's a funny thing about the truth. You don't have to remember who you said what to and cover your tracks. It stands on its own. But yeah, I guess my perception is a little different. I recall you explaining to us about how, they were, you were waiting at the front gate of the palace, and the satellite show, they had trucks coming out the back gate, and you guys were waiting in the hot sun and the dust for hours and hours, and they seemed to love that kind of information on the cable at the time.
Well, one of the things you have to remember is that I did not deal with the press when I was an active weapons inspector. We were not encouraged to do so. In fact, in many cases, we were not permitted to do so. So when I spoke to the press, it was after my resignation, after I had been elevated to some sort of national figure through my testimony before the United States Senate. And so when I spoke of these anecdotal reminiscences, they were generally to illustrate a point. And the point was that the weapons inspection process was a very difficult process, one in which the Iraqis were not totally compliant with, but also to explain that when you have an inspection process, it's based upon the rule of law, mandates set forth by Security Council resolutions that were voted on by the member states, including the United States, that said Iraq must disarm, and that failure on the part of Iraq to disarm would be seen as a violation of these resolutions, and therefore there needs to be consequences.
Okay, hello, check 1 2. Deb, I do not hear Scott. and I'm not sure if it's my end or his end. Let's see what we got here. Check 1, 2. Hold on. Okay, great. I think we just lost Scott. We got him back on. Hold on one sec. And we'll have him back on with us. Of course, the Gremlins are going to come out on a night like this with such a powerful guest. You know, it seems like it's par for the course. So, all right. So we're getting them back on the line. And it's really the pregnant pause there. You know, we're talking about how the Iraqis were being intransigent there and like that. So we'll be getting back to Scott Ritter in just a moment. A little technical difficulty, unfortunately, to be expected. Like that. Okay, let's see. I got to refresh my. Here we go. All right, let's get back now. Scott, are you there? Oops, 1 second. Here we go. Scott, are you there now? Okay, good. The Gremlins are coming out tonight, Scott.
Yeah, no problem. It's called reality, you know.
Par for the course with certain guests, I would say. But I don't want to get into a conspiracy theory there, you know. So you were saying about the Iraqi, how difficult the process was, and the Iraqis, I assume, were not thrilled with it themselves.
You know, the Iraqis weren't doing their job. But to be frank, neither was the United Nations nor the United States. The United Nations needed to do its job by being firm with Iraq and saying, if you violate, there will be consequences. But instead, every time Iraq violated, every time Iraq obstructed, the United Nations passed a resolution condemning it and then sending the inspectors back in. And as a weapons inspector, once you've had a gun put in your face and told you can't enter this facility, and then you leave expecting that the world will act with outrage, to find out that, you know, the resolution was, a finger waved in the face of Saddam Hussein, and now we're sent back in. That's not very heartening. But then the other problem was the fact that there was a sense of legitimacy on the stance that Iraq was taking. You know, the resolutions were part of a bargain that if Iraq disarmed, economic sanctions would be lifted. And yet from the very beginning, starting back in 1992, the United States made it clear that even if Iraq fully cooperated, sanctions would not be lifted until which time Saddam Hussein was removed from power. And there was no Security Council resolution authorizing that. So, you know, the Iraqis held somewhat of a moral high ground in dealing with us, saying, why should we cooperate with you when all we're going to get is a continuation of sanctions to what end? Because we're not going to give up our president. The president's not going to leave willingly. So what's the purpose of this exercise? And as inspectors who were there to carry out assiduously the mandate of disarmament, it made our job difficult. So that was the impression I was trying to give when I spoke of these anecdotal stories about weapons inspections. But the bottom line was Iraq had not been found under the letter of the law to be in compliance, and therefore there was an ongoing need for weapons inspectors to be in Iraq. And Iraq, had to be condemned so long as it would not allow these weapons inspectors.
All right, we'll be right back with Scott.
Easy.
Good friends, let's get right back to it. Tom Kiley, INN World Report Radio, every Tuesday and Thursday night here on the great Logos Radio Network. And this is when we do our job as best as we possibly can. We get great people like Scott Ritter to come on the show. And I got to tell you, as much as I'm up on all of this information, I'm picking up a lot of good information again that was in between the lines. Scott, right before the break, you were talking about the difficult position. This must have been difficult for you because you are one of the straightest shooters that I know. And here you are, doing a difficult job, and ultimately your bosses are double dealing, and heads I win, tails you lose for the Iraqis. How did that feel?
Well, it wasn't good. I mean, I'm not naive. I came into the job as a UN weapons inspector as a veteran, combat Marine intelligence officer who had fought in the first Gulf War and did not hold Iraq or its dictator in high regard. And when I received the assignment to the United Nations, I was straight up with the State Department. I said, if there's another agenda here, let me know. I'm all for it. I'm not here to hug trees and save the world. I'm here to serve my country. What do you need me to do? And I was told without any hesitation, your job is to implement Security Council Resolution 687. Your boss is the executive chairman, who in this case was a Swedish diplomat. And what the United States wants is for this resolution to be implemented. And I said, okay, so that's a pure straight game, no winks, no nods, no under the table. They said, nope, straight game. And I saluted smartly and proceeded to do just that, only to find that, in fact, there was another game being played by the CIA, and that game was regime change, and that the weapons inspection process was only useful to the United States insofar as it facilitated this regime change policy. And it did so by creating the conditions that continued economic sanctions in an effort to isolate and contain Saddam Hussein. And what that means is that you had to maintain the perception that Iraq was not in compliance with its disarmament obligation. This was an easy perception to maintain in the early years because, frankly speaking, Iraq was not in compliance, and it was obstructing us. But after a series of failed coup attempts by the CIA, which Iraq was aware of and the Iraqi government put down with some violence to those involved, it became clear to the Iraqis that the weapons inspection process was corrupted, that it was a vehicle of regime change. And that's where it became difficult, because in order to do my job, which I was told without any ifs, ands, or buts, was 100% implementation of the will of the Security Council as set forth by its resolutions, I was not just bumping heads with the Iraqis, I was bumping heads more and more with my own government, with the CIA, with the State Department, with the White House, because they had an agenda that they just weren't being honest about. They kept saying in public, they kept saying to me, no, disarm Iraq, this is what we want. But the closer we came to a resolution of that issue, the more difficulties the United States put in our way, because the last thing they wanted was for the United Nations weapons inspectors to give Iraq a clean bill of health. And so we had a lot of problems.
And somewhere along the line, Scott, it seems like the Iraqis realized, you know what, it's going to be better to take that off the table and get rid of the weapons of mass destruction. Is that what happened?
They did. Basically, the Iraqis, when they issued their first set of their first declarations back in the spring of 1991, they lied. They said that they did not have a nuclear weapons program. They did not have a biological weapons program. They underdeclared their chemical weapons capability, and they underdeclared their ballistic missile capability. And we inspectors went in and did a heck of a job in exposing this lie. We confronted the Iraqis with the inconsistencies. We discovered hidden material, and we compelled the Iraqi government to admit, yes, we told a lie. And they put forward a new declaration. But the problem was there was no consequence for this lie. The Security Council, rather than telling the Iraqis, no, you only have one chance, you blew it, and now the war is back on. Because remember, this is all part and parcel of a ceasefire resolution. What the Security Council said is, okay, thank you for your new declaration. We're going to send the weapons inspectors back in. This time you have to fully cooperate. And, they didn't. Once again, this new declaration they had did not admit to a biological weapons capability. It did not admit to the totality of their chemical weapons capability. It did not admit to every aspect of their nuclear weapons capability or their ballistic, chemical or ballistic missile capability. So once again, we inspectors had to go in and ferret out the truth. But by 1995, it became apparent to the Iraqis that the game's up. These guys are on us, and they came clean. Now, we didn't just applaud and declare the game to be over because they had lied to us too many times in the past, but they gave us a declaration, they gave us a story, and we began to investigate this story. And what we found is, by and large, the Iraqis were telling the truth. And moreover, another facet of our inspection activities was the monitoring of Iraqi production capability. We had blanketed the totality of their industrial infrastructure with monitoring inspection capabilities. We had cameras, we had air sensors, we had no-notice inspections. And not only could we say for certain that Iraq was not in the position of building anything at that time, it would take them months, if not years, to reconstitute that capability. So not only were we not finding any evidence that Iraq had hidden information from us, we were in a position to say without any ifs, ands, or buts that they could not produce weapons of mass destruction so long as weapons inspectors were in place. And that's the important part. And this is what I was so worried about when I left as a weapons inspector, is that we needed the weapons inspectors back in. Now, a lot of people say, well, then the Iraqis shouldn't have kicked them out. They didn't. If you go back and study that period of time in the fall and winter of 1998, it was the Clinton administration that ordered the inspectors out on the eve of the Operation Desert Fox 72-hour bombing campaign. And they used information collected by the inspectors to target Saddam Hussein and his senior leadership.
I remember that. I thought that was that was really bad for you guys being used as on a double purpose like that without your knowledge and everything. Boy, that must have been really difficult.
Because the Iraqis said the inspectors will never be allowed back in, which is what the United States wanted to begin with, because now the United States had a situation where they could create a perception that Iraq was non-compliant and then leave that perception hanging because there was no way to disprove that. The weapons inspectors were not going to be allowed back in. And now the United States could paint any picture they want, and they did. If you remember the lead up to the war, the Iraqis were going to put drones on a cargo ship and fly over an American port and spray biological weapons agent. Iraq had ballistic missiles suddenly that sprang up from who knows where that could hit Europe and threaten the United States. All these capabilities that we knew they didn't have at the end of 1998 suddenly manifested themselves out of thin air, and everybody was buying into it.
Well, that's what it's all about, right? Perception management. It's not about the truth. It's about perception, but it's not a game of bridge. It's there are real lives involved. What was it from your perspective? We hear so much about the sanctions and the difficulties and in fact, deadliness of them on the Iraqi society. You were there working. How did the sanction program look to you on the ground there in Iraq? Is it true that all these children were starving and dying and so forth?
Well, I'll say again, my job was as a weapons inspector. I was not a humanitarian worker. I was not somebody from the World Food Program whose job it was to specifically investigate this. So any insights I have are from direct observation made upon, incomplete information. My job is to hunt down weapons of mass destruction, not to, count the number of dead or dying babies in an Iraqi hospital.
Right, and I'm just asking for anecdotal, your perception right around.
I just want to make sure that I'm not coming off as some sort of
expert absolutely.
When I'm not. What I will say is this. When I first got to Iraq in late 1991, after the Gulf War, Iraq was still living off the fat of its occupation of Kuwait. So, the stores were still stocked. There was still food available. There was still medicine available. There was still an element of the good life. Restaurants were open. The electricity was on, et cetera. But gradually, the fat got eaten up. All the stuff they stole from Kuwait got consumed or sold. And now, because of economic sanctions, Iraq had no ability to continue to reconstitute. And this isn't just a matter of bridges and oil infrastructure and roads and highways and buildings. This is about hospitals. This is about water purification facilities. This is about water distribution capability. The basic infrastructure of a healthy society. And
presumably these things would have been off the table in any case on a regime of sanctions.
Well, no, initially no, because we basically had total sanctions in play. One of the interesting things, though, is as the horrific impact of economic sanctions became apparent to the world, and I'm telling you that, when a society degrades, it degrades rapidly. We went from, well-maintained parks one month, and then 2 months later to have the parks full of women with dying babies begging for food. Hospitals went from being well-maintained hospitals with, open beds available to the ill to facilities that were crumbling with no medicine, no electricity, no clean water, overflowing with sick and dying people. And the people that paid the price the most in Iraq were the elderly, the sick, and the children. These are the people that, caught the diseases. And think about it. You're a mother who's already starving because there's not enough food because of sanctions. You have an infant who you can't nourish because you can't produce the breast milk necessary, so the infant's already weakened, its immune system is down.
All right, we'll be right back with Scott. All right, good friends. Welcome back. Tom Kiley, INN World Report Radio. Very exciting. Scott Ritter on the program on the radio side of INN for the first time tonight. And I hope we can have Scott on going further because his perspective, his service is just absolutely amazing. Speaking truth to power, just one of the biggest lies that has been exposed in our time, the weapons of mass destruction of Iraq. And here's the man who was right there at ground zero And Scott, I also want to thank you for your personal observations that you're sharing with us, albeit exactly that, personal observations, not something that was within your bailiwick or portfolio while you were there. But, I think Americans need to get a clearer humanitarian or humanistic picture of those sanctions, because everything I heard about them is that they're really terrible. Much to the delight, I shouldn't say much to the delight, but characterized by people like Madeleine Albright as being well worth the price. For what, I don't know, but well worth the price.
No, she was confronted about that by the United Nations estimates that 500,000 Iraqi children had died as a direct result of economic sanctions, and she said it's a price we're willing to pay. But America wasn't paying any price at that time. It was the Iraqi people who were paying that price, and it just shows an absolute horrible indifference to the human condition and human suffering, and for no legitimate end. It was simply
no gain. Saddam wasn't deposed. This is the thing that gets me. I guess I trace this back to the British bombing of German cities during World War II. The idea that if you bring hell down on the civilians, they're going to get angry with their leadership and they're going to oust them. And I think that was absolutely what was going on in Iraq, and that didn't happen in Iraq. It didn't happen in Germany, and it didn't happen in North Vietnam or and a lot of other places. And you were right there watching this going on.
I had senior Iraqi officials tell me in 1993, literally thanking me for America's stupid policy, because they said that they were very vulnerable in 1991, 1992, but because of the economic sanctions, they were able to rally the Iraqi people around Saddam Hussein, and that he became more solidly entrenched than ever. Whether they drank the Kool-Aid, however you want to say, perception becomes its own reality, and from the perception of the Iraqi people, the world was at war with them. The world was punishing them. They were the ones paying the price, and it was Saddam who was rebuilding the bridges. It was Saddam who was providing for them. And one of the great ironies is that, as the Iraqi children died, the international community said, well, wait a minute, these sanctions are causing horrific suffering. So now they created what's called the Oil for Food program, which allowed the Iraqis to sell oil on the market and generate funds, which then were used to alleviate the consequences of sanctions. How stupid can you get? I mean, you have sanctions which are designed to create suffering so that the people will rise up and bring about change from within, and then you create the conditions that basically undoes all of that. It shows the inconsistency of policy, how basically we had no policy. We didn't know what we were doing, neither us nor the rest of the world.
So, Scott, let's go forward now, okay? That was, between the two wars in the middle section there, you're working. At some point, as we get close to the second war, the country is basically fully cleaned out. Maybe there's a little pocket here or there, but for all intents and purposes, the country's cleaned out. When do you estimate that was where you could safely say there ain't no weapons there anymore?
Well, we were, when you reverse engineer this, it became clear that Iraq had unilaterally destroyed the vast majority of its weapons by the summer of 1991. They lied about it because they didn't want to admit that they had, lied to us in their initial declarations. But the actual weapons were by and large gone by the summer of 1991. We were able to confirm that sometime in 1993, 1994. But we always believed that they were holding on to the intellectual property, that the blueprints and the designs and the drawings and maybe some production equipment that would enable them to rapidly reconstitute elements of this capability. And it turns out we were right. In the summer of 1995, Saddam Hussein's son-in-law, Hussein Kamal, defected, and in doing so, a process began which revealed that the Iraqis had this entire archive that they had hidden from us, and that was turned over to us. And when they turned that over, they had to come clean about the last aspects of their program that they had hidden from us, certain elements of their biological program, their chemical program, etc. And then I would say by 1996, 1997, we had pretty much verified that this indeed was the case. We had, and here's where we come down to the problem. The Security Council, in its resolution, said Iraq had to be disarmed 100%. It didn't allow for a certain wiggle room of uncertainty that you get after 5 years of buried weapons, secretly destroyed weapons, documents blown up in bombing raids where you can't get the complete data set assembled. We had about a 96, 97, 98% level of certainty, but there was some uncertainty as to whether or not we could confirm that everything had been destroyed. And the United States said we need to have 100%, what we call quantitative analysis. You have to account for every nut, bolt, and screw, as opposed to a qualitative analysis which says hey, even if you factor in what we can't account for, they don't have a weapons program.
There's not enough root left in the plant.
That they didn't have a weapons program.
That's pretty amazing, Scott. So you're saying the bulk of the weaponry itself was already gone in 1991, and the rest of the time you spent there was in mop-up operations, making sure that the infrastructure could not be reestablished. Is that did I hear you right?
Correct. I mean, that was one aspect, was putting in what we call a monitoring regime, and then the other one was hunting down for, doing a cat and mouse game, hunting for the hidden documents, hunting for people that we could interview. And we did a huge investigation overseas, going to the companies that sold Iraq this material. And we basically assembled this giant jigsaw puzzle. And by 1996, even though there are a few pieces missing, we're able to say, we see the big picture now.
That's pretty amazing. 1996 to 2003, that's 4, 5, 6, 7 years of basically no real weapons of mass destruction, left, as well as the capability being destroyed. And yet we're having this as the pretext to go to war. And you're telling everybody there ain't no there. Donald Rumsfeld, on the other hand, is saying not only is there a there, but we know exactly where there is there, and and then you had Colin Powell with this, the stupid pictures and all of that stuff. So it was a great long while where there were no weapons of mass destruction. Let's go up to that date. You seem to have gone through some sort of a catharsis. No friend of Saddam Hussein by any means, but you were heroically standing up for the Iraqi people and saying, "Do not use this as a pretext." I remember clearly. That's what you said on our show.
Well, I was standing up for the Iraqi people, but moreover, I was standing up for the American people, especially those Americans who honor us by putting on the uniform of, serving members of the armed forces, people who are willing to give their lives in defense of their country. As a former Marine who had served in combat, served in a time of war, served my country proudly, I understood the sacrifices that were going to be asked of these people, and I also understood that before we send them to war, we have to make sure that we've exhausted all possibilities short of war to resolve the problem, and that the problem we're asking them to resolve is one that is worthy of the sacrifice we're asking them to make. And I can say this, that in 1998, we knew for certain Iraq didn't have weapons of mass destruction. Now, in 2002, on the eve of the war, the Bush administration is saying that they know for certain that Iraq had them. All I was asking of the Bush administration was to put the proof on the table. I went to the Senate Select Intelligence Committee. I met with Senator Dianne Feinstein. And I said, look, you don't have to tell me any secret information. Just look me in the eye and tell me right now, if you have seen a briefing that definitively proves Iraq has weapons of mass destruction, I will shut up and I will get out of the way. And she said, I can't say that I have seen that. Nobody's presented that to me. And that's the problem. We're being sold a bill of goods, but there was nothing there. It was all made up.
Well, it's a problem that's been an ongoing one. Ray McGovern, who you spoke so eloquently with on Sunday night, he's been on this show over the years many, many times, and also Mel Goodman is associates of his. And they talk about Team B being established with a young Robert Gates being all too happy to lead the charge in Team B. I think it was during Reagan under Casey, because the truth was not suitable. So they had to pump up the Soviet Union and make it look like there was stuff that was not there. This is a fact that apparently, I guess, I don't know, it's well entrenched now here in our policy system. And as you point out, it's American servicemen and women who die for it. And I don't know, 1 million Iraqis? What's your estimate?
The estimate, I think, is between economic sanctions and the war. First of all, economic sanctions, they're talking of upwards of 2 million Iraqis dying. We had 500,000 children in the mid-1990s. You had another decade of sanctions, and you have the elderly, you have the children. Then there's also the indirect results, people who weren't born because of this. The number of the detrimental impact this had on Iraqi society as a whole, because families were broken apart. The next generation wasn't born because of this. So they're saying that the number. And
then shock and awe in the second invasion. How many people died through that? We got to be talking 3 million people plus.
No. I think the war. So we killed tens of thousands of Iraqis in the invasion.
Right.
And then hundreds of thousands died in the occupation.
Right.
It's horrific, no matter how you look at it.
All the way up to today.
Needed to die. That's the sad part.
Yeah. Well, we got about a minute and a half before the next break. We're talking with Scott Ritter, friends, and we've gone through some very, very interesting history. We're about up to the point where the war is getting started, the second invasion. But I want to, Scott, when we come back, I also want to talk with you. I want to bring it up to today. We've got these different people running for president, and some of them were back there voting and should have been in a position to know. And I want to talk with you about that, about our senator, Hillary Clinton. But in the meanwhile, What do you say, Scott? Can you give us more than one more segment? We only have you slated for one more segment.
I'm here for you, whatever you need.
All right. So then, you know what I suggest? We'll do that, and we'll have you back on. We'll keep talking, and then maybe a little bit later, we'll see if anybody wants to call in and put any questions to you. How's that?
Sure thing.
Wonderful. All right, friends, we're talking with Scott Ritter. We're going to take a pause here. We're right about at the point of going into the Second War, but there's much more to come. We're going to be bringing it all the way up to date, and like that. So this is the alternative media at its finest, if you ask me. People are waking up, and it's because people like Scott Ritter now have a venue to talk and get their side of the story out, and it's really helping all the way around. Tom Kiley, INN World Report, right back after.
This is the Logos Radio Network.
All right, good friends, welcome back. An evening with Scott Ritter. Long overdue, but I'm thrilled to be able to bring Scott here onto the program. We spent a good deal of time Sunday night in New York City with another one of your favorites, Ray McGovern, and we listened to both Ray and Scott, and we're going to bring the conversation up to that point because it involves the current presidential race and foreign policy positions. But right now we're sort of going through history. We've got a couple more segments. We will be opening up the phone line. So if you do have a question for Scott, get ready, and I'll let you know, and then you can call in. So Scott, here we are. And you mentioned, by the way, your boss at the UN. I'm assuming that was Hans Blix. Can we mention him by name?
No, the first boss is actually another Swede named Rolf Ekéus. Hans Blix was the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, replaced by Mohammed El-Baradei later on. But my initial boss was a Swede named Rolf Ekéus, and then in 1997, he was replaced by an Australian named Richard Butler.
I remember that name, too. Now, I also recall an uneasiness with one or more of these bosses because you were talking the truth, and they were going to them for clarification. And as I recall, we kind of got a mealy-mouthed sort of, obfuscation out of them. Did anything like that happen? You don't have to mention names.
Well, I mean, first of all, both men are diplomats, and I'm not, and neither are some of the inspectors. So there were numerous occasions where you have the classic situation where with the diplomat saying, what my esteemed inspector meant to say was X, because sometimes we weren't as diplomatic as we needed to be when we were in the field. But the only time it got mealy-mouthed was with Richard Butler, and I'm on the record on this. I have a lot of respect to and a lot of high regard for Richard Butler, but I will say that he was not an unbiased leader of the Special Commission. He was very much a pro-American leader of the Special Commission, and he willingly did the bidding of the United States. And it created some issues where I would be sent off to do a task that he had authorized, and then he would, obfuscate when I got back. And it got a little uncomfortable at the end there, yeah.
So when you were speaking out before the invasion, you were at INN and a few other places. Were you already retired at that point, as it were, from the military, from UNSCOM, from both, or how did that go?
No, when I left UNSCOM in August of 1998, that was it. I had no official ties with the U.S. government, no ties with the United Nations. I was a private citizen. So when I met with you in March of 2003, I did so as a private citizen.
So you were out of the military as well by then?
Correct.
Maybe on reserve or something. I don't know. Okay.
And I totally out.
Okay. All right. So Scott, one of the things that really impressed me was that you were clearly, what you said earlier in the program. Hey, look, let me know. What's the plan? I'm on board. This is not a nice guy. And, if we're going to do this or that, and it's my mission, it's legitimate, it's a legal order, I'll do it. That impression came through loud and clear, early on when you used to be on the cable networks. And then, before the war, the Second War, you're on INN. And since, especially since, you've been standing up and talking truth to power. One of the things I was so impressed about was that was this guy all along, but you just weren't in a position to show that sort of thing, mostly because you didn't have people like Donald Rumsfeld talking this big lie, for you to clear up. And there was a lot of people who ended up doing that. What about your personal transformation? It seems like there's been one, if nothing else, maybe not internal, certainly externally. What about that? When did that, how is that working? When did that get started? Because it seems like you've been on this truth to power streak ever since.
Well, trust me, it's not a role that I would wish on anyone. I'd much rather be the compliant military officer, the compliant civil servant doing their job in the shadows and have no one know who I am. But when I resigned in August of 1998, I did so out of protest over a policy that I felt was putting America and the world at risk. And I realized that, if I'm going to resign, first of all, I'm losing my job, I'm losing my income, I'm putting my family at risk. As the CIA station chief said, a giant target will be painted on me. And you can't go down that path, half-cocked. It's all or nothing. And so at that point in time, I made the decision that I'm all in. It's going to be telling the truth, with the biggest possible impact. That's why I testified before the United States Senate. I testified before the United States Congress. I did my best to get the truth out there. And, you think at some point in time there would be, an expiration date on that sort of thing. But the deeper you get into the truth-telling business, the more you realize that there's a larger lie dissemination business at hand. It's not just about Iraq. What Iraq showed me is that there's a formula, the basic red meat of American interventionism, where we label a leader to be a rogue leader of a rogue state. We imbue him with weapons of mass destruction capability that represents a threat to humanity. And then we link him with terrorism, call this country a state sponsor of terrorism, and then we create a nexus between this rogue state with weapons of mass destruction and international terrorism that thereby legitimizes economic sanctions to contain, no-fly zones to destabilize, and the next step is military intervention. This was the Iraq model, and we've seen the Iraq model used again in Libya. We've seen it try to be used in Syria, started to be used in Iran. And, once you see the big picture, once you see that model, it's imperative you speak out about it. And so that's what I've been doing.
Scott, one thing's been made absolutely clear from Iraq, at least. Once they get so far as to get their no-fly zone, it's pretty much all over. A no-fly zone very quickly turns into, I suppose under the pretext of NATO aircraft being painted with radar, which is what any country should do over its sovereign airspace. Whether they're going to actually act on that is another story. But that gives a pretext then to just destroy civil infrastructure and as well as military infrastructure, and it's all downhill from there. Is that an accurate perception?
That's absolutely correct. Look, when we sent the U-2 spy planes over Iraq, they were painted black, but they had UN insignia. They flew missions that we directed. We got the film. But every mission that went in had what's called a guerrilla package sitting off on the other side of the border, ready to make a move in case the Iraqis decided to target that plane. And that guerrilla package, consisted of 60 to 80 airplanes. We're talking about electronic warcraft airplanes. We're talking about air defense suppression. We're talking about air-to-air fighter capability. So, and that's just for one sortie. Now, if you're going to do a no-fly zone, the first thing you have to do is, make sure that it's uncontested airspace. This means you go out and you clear out the enemy airfields, blow up their airplanes, then you destroy their radars, you destroy their surface-to-air missiles, you destroy their command and control capability, their communications capability. Then you also end up interdicting their ability of their ground forces to respond in that same area. So it becomes a cover for all-out warfare. We saw this in Iraq. We saw this in Libya. They said the no-fly zone was for humanitarian purposes. But as the American general said, when you say no-fly zone, we got to go in and take everything out. So there's going to be a lot of bombing. And there was a lot of bombing. And how does a no-fly zone transition into targeting Syrian army artillery pieces or Syrian army tanks? So it was a front. It was a cover. It was a lie. It was never a no-fly zone. It was always direct military intervention to achieve the ultimate objective, which was regime change.
How do you use it as a pretext? I'm told we bombed Libya's water program. I mean, what's that got to do with anything? Is that true? Did we really target that amazing water program that they have?
Well, I don't know, but what I can say is this: the water program you're talking about is a facility called Tarhuna, and back in the 1990s, Bill Clinton, under the presidency of Bill Clinton, Tarhuna was put up as the biggest underground chemical weapons facility the world has ever seen. You're right,
Scott. It was hydrogen and oxygen, H2O.
Yeah, all it was what the Libyans said from day one. It was called the Great River. It's a man-made water distribution system, but we probably bombed it because we had bought into our own mythology.
Well, at best, and I think there could be a much more nefarious thing. Water is going to be the new gold, the new oil there in the Middle East. We're with Scott Ritter. We have a couple of more segments, so if you'd like to ask Scott a question, now's your time. 512-646-1984. We'll start taking calls when we get back.
Are you worried your shyness might hold you back in the business world? I'm Dr. Catherine Albrecht, back to reassure you that introverts can indeed climb to the top of the ladder while still avoiding the limelight right after this.
Privacy is under attack. When you give up data about yourself, you'll never get it back again. And once your privacy is gone, you'll find your freedoms will start to vanish too. So protect your rights, say no to surveillance, and keep your information to yourself. Privacy, it's worth hanging on to. This message is brought to you by StartPage.com, the private search engine alternative to Google, Yahoo, and Bing. Start over with StartPage.
Given the media prominence of guys like Larry Ellison and Richard Branson, it's easy to assume that all successful people are charismatic extroverts. But recent research has found that's not the case. In fact, introverts do better than extroverts by a ratio of 4-to-1 and more often leave positive legacies. That's because introverts focus on one goal at a time rather than scattering their energies. They value teamwork more than ego. They're not threatened by high-performing colleagues, and precisely because they're not in the limelight, they find it easier to admit their mistakes and change course when needed. So I guess the old saying is true. Still waters really do run deep. I'm Dr. Catherine Albrecht for StartPage.com, the world's most private search engine.
About chemtrails.
You're listening to the Logos Radio Network at logosradionetwork.com.
Welcome back. Well, I hope it's sounding okay on your end. Give us a call now and let us know. 512-646-1984. This, my friends, and anything like this is why I got into alternative media back in 2001. And in 2003, we had this man on the show, Scott Ritter, to do just this kind of thing, telling truth. And here he is again tonight. And this is what it's all about. And I'm so thankful that for people like Scott out there and for the ability now to bring their voices to you, which did not really exist until the revolution in technology. Scott, we've got a couple of great callers on the line. Do you mind if we take a couple of calls?
Go right ahead.
All right. Richard, one of the hardest working guys listening to this program. Richard, are you there?
Hey, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. And I want to thank you and Mr. Ritter for standing with the truth so long without ever backing down. And history will smile on both of you. I just wanted to ask Mr. Ritter right quick. I know you got a lot of callers. Who would he hold most responsible in the press corps? Because without a strong press corps to come against you like they did, they could have never pulled it off. All the rum spilling and Dick Cheney in the world couldn't have pulled off what they pulled off without the Hannitys and all those on the left. So who would you hold most responsible, or would you hold them all responsible for keeping this cover up? And that's all I got. Thank you.
Well, first of all, I think the entire, with very few exceptions, the entire American media establishment failed the American public when it came to Iraq. I would specifically target CNN just because they created the facade of wanting to tell the truth when, in fact, all they were doing was, creating the conditions to facilitate a war, which they saw as a business opportunity. And I hold CNN personally accountable for much of the disinformation out there, but everybody failed. The New York Times, Judith Miller, across the board, with the exception of, say, Seymour Hersh and a few others, there's not too many bright, shining stars in American journalism anymore.
In the American corporate media.
Tom being the exception.
No, there's a lot of great people in the alternative media now. Actually, before we go to our next caller, Scott, INN was only about 2 years into its work back when you first came on, and the alternative media has changed a great deal since then. From your perspective, do you see that? What's your impression of how the alternative media has grown and its impact now?
Well, I mean, again, I'm operating in a data-free zone, so this is just speaking off the top of my head. I think that alternative media has always been about, seeking out, the alternate side of the story. What the mainstream media is not telling you. In the case of Iraq and other things, that means that they're seeking out the truth. I don't think that alternative media, has the resources, at least, maybe not back then, maybe today they're doing better, to get as broad of an audience as it deserves. One would hope that truth would be an empowering medium, and that people would start embracing the truth and flocking to alternative media. But yeah, I view the American people as a bunch of compliant sheep who like to sit down on their sofas and their lounge chairs and turn on something that makes them feel comfortable. Alternative media is not about entertaining; it's about informing. And I think most Americans, when they come home from work, want to be entertained, and that's what news has become, sort of a vehicle of entertaining, not a vehicle of informing.
Infotainment. Well, I like to think we're entertaining as well. It's great. It's a double combination there. If you can get the truth and do it in an entertaining way, it's so much the better. But it has changed a great deal. It is coming along. People are waking up. And you know what, Scott? You know what's really changed? 2008, with the real acceleration of the destruction of the vaunted American middle class, that's really awakened a lot of people. Right here, we're both New Yorkers. I was down in Zuccotti Park watching Occupy Wall Street. Bernie Sanders, I think, is finally the other shoe dropping on that. So that has also revealed to people it's a big lie anymore. It's all of this extortion of neoliberal politics ain't working for everybody but the very thinnest slice at the top. So I think that's had a big impact. But listen, Julian, one of our great listeners, is on the line, and you can be next, folks. 512-646-1984 if you'd like to speak with our guest, Scott Ritter. Good evening, Julian. How are you tonight?
Good, Tom. Hello, Scott. I wanted to just say, back in 2003, before the war, you came to Austin. I saw you at this, I think it was a Presbyterian church, and just, there was a full crowd in there, really good. But, it was just what you were saying and just the feeling of dread to me, because of the rest of most of the society was just believing the official story, that it wasn't going to be able to be stopped. And anyway, it was, but thank you for just being so amazing, doing what you're doing. And then just even the years of the no-fly zone in Iraq, that, how could they have any weapons after, 12 years of that going on? And I suppose the question I'd ask you is, when Colin Powell spoke at the UN, people like Tarpley, who's on Webster Tarpley's on Tom's show a lot. I mean, Colin Powell didn't even leave the building, and someone like Tarpley would say, oh, he's not telling the truth. So what were your thoughts about Powell? If you said it earlier, I didn't hear it, but be my question for you.
No, it's a great question. Thank you very much for it. Look, Colin Powell, 4-star general, served his country, and I read his book. I served, under him when he was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff during the Gulf War. My initial time as a weapons inspector, Colin Powell was still there. He, played an important role in providing support to the weapons inspection process. So he's somebody who I had a lot of respect for. I read his book. He said Vietnam shaped him. He would never again allow the establishment to fail the soldiers by promulgating a lie. So when I saw him on TV speaking before the Security Council, I was in Japan at the time I spoke before the Japanese parliament trying to get them to vote against supporting the war. It was an unsuccessful effort, but I gave it a good old college try. But I was a guest at the International Press Club of Japan, and we paused so we could all watch that. And I gave a speech right afterwards, and I basically said the same thing, that, this entire presentation was a lie, and I refuted every element of his presentation, from the white powder and the little vial to the photographs which he showed claiming it to be a chemical storage area, to the radio intercepts that he played. I mean, nothing he said was true. And it turned out that I was 100% correct, not because I was making it up, but because as a weapons inspector, I was familiar with every aspect of what he was talking about, and I knew it to be false. No one cared. I said this before the International Press Club. There were representatives of every major media organization in the world there. None of them ran that story. They all went out and embraced the Colin Powell narrative. And, when the average American turns on the TV, opens a newspaper, and there it is saying that Colin Powell, slam dunk presentation, it's a wonder. That's why. And
no price to pay. I mean, really no price to pay. It's interesting because thank you, Julian, for bringing up Colin Powell. Both of you on the military side are exemplary. I'm sure he's quite a competent military leader. But on the truth side, there's just no comparison. And I don't buy this hand-wringing of, oh, my gosh, come on. I don't believe it. Like you, in real time, I knew he was lying. Lying.
I'll say this about Colin Powell. In September of 1998, I was invited to speak at a meeting in Aspen put together by Forsman Little Company, a big investment banking company that basically buys companies and builds boards. And they have the most elite members of American society on their boards: Colin Powell, Henry Kissinger, George Shultz, and they were all invited to this. And when I was there, I was looking around, and suddenly the light went off. You don't get a Colin Powell to sit on your board for free. He makes money. He makes a lot of money, a lot more money than he made as a general. Why did Colin Powell do what he did? Because he became part of the establishment. He had to play the game because he knew that when he left as Secretary of State, he would either return to his pension as a general, which is not very much, enough to give you a middle-class existence, or return to his status as a rock star, where he was sitting on boards of a variety of companies, bringing in hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars.
Increase in mental functioning.
All right, good friends. Welcome back. Tom Kiley, INN World Report Radio. Last segment here of this show. We've got Scott Ritter for the first time on INN Radio. We're going to have him back for sure. And if you'd like to get a call in, give us a ring, 512-646-1984. Scott, first of all, thanks. I know what's going to happen. We're going to talk right down to the wire, and it's going to be very exciting. And I'm not going to get to the business, so let's do that right now. First of all, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Can we tap you sooner rather than later to come back?
You've got my information. Just let me know when's good for you, and if I can do it, I'll be more than happy to.
Will do, because this fantastic audience, and you're on the air live in Austin, Texas, where you've spoken before, as well as people around the world are listening. I can't tell you it's a great, huge audience, but you know what? They're really thinking and caring people in Greece and Australia and Ireland, where I get the emails from. So before we continue and run out of time, let's bring it up to date. You've written at least one book that I'm aware of. What's in the pipeline, or what's been out there? And do you have a website or something? How do people stay in touch with you and read your writings and hear about where you're going to be and so forth?
Well, I'm old-fashioned Marine, so I don't have a website or anything like that. Somewhat of a Luddite. But I've written 8 books. They're put out by pretty prominent publishers, so they're easily accessible on Amazon.com or Barnes and Nobles. I write regularly for the Huffington Post, so people can read my columns there. I have a book in the works on the Iranian nuclear deal, so hopefully that'll be out in the not too distant future. So I keep busy, plugging it here and there.
Well, there was a while there where I did not see you being that active. I don't know if I was just out of touch or you were taking a bit of a hiatus or something, but I'm so glad to see you back in form. You look really healthy, really tall, by the way. The first time I got a chance to meet you in person, and you look like you were ready to go. So thank you for being back. Welcome back. If indeed you were someplace, because we sorely missed you. How does it go forward for you now? Now you're talking about, let's go fast forward to this cycle. It seems to me, Scott, that there is an insurrection going on around between Europe and the United States, and maybe in other places. People are fed up with the neoliberal economics, with the Ziokan foreign policy. You've got this horrible situation in the Middle East, endless war, which you and Ray McGovern talked about on Sunday night being the preferred option from Israel. Rather having the chaos than any kind of a strong government. And now we see, we've got Podemos in Spain, we've got Syriza that happened in Greece, the Irish elections, the Portuguese elections, the Icelandic elections, and now we've got Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders representing this anger here in the United States. This is it seems to me, a turning point. The old school, the old guard is really struggling right now. People are not buying it anymore. It's going to take them a while before they come up with a new model. How do you see the prospects of getting some positive change going at this time?
Well, as somebody who, like I said, I just finished researching and writing a book on Iran. One of the issues that I focused on there was, their government, which is a democracy. A lot of Americans might be surprised to hear that. But one of the basic tenets of the democracy, of Islamic democracy as practiced by Iran, is the notion of legitimacy. It's very important for the government that in an election, as many people come out and vote, because they view the level of participation as a vote of confidence on the system. And any time that you get below 70% participation, the government gets very nervous because they feel as if they're losing legitimacy. And the reason why I bring this up is that if you eliminate either Donald Trump or Bernie Sanders from the equation, I think you're going to see a level of participation in the American electoral process this coming November that's going to be historically low, meaning that the American public has lost confidence in the system. And I think that's what a Trump candidacy and a Sanders candidacy shows. This is not an endorsement of either candidate or their positions. It's just a reflection of the reality that the establishment has failed the American public, and the American public's starting to wake up to that. And if you disenfranchise the American public by eliminating either candidate, I think you're going to see, very low turnout rates, turnout levels in the November election, and that's going to signal the beginning of the end for the establishment as we know it. I don't know if the Republican Party is going to survive this iteration. I don't know if the Democratic Party could survive a Clinton presidency, because I think the level of incompetence that would be shown there, the level of corruption, the level of collusion, would just make it all too clear that the Democratic Party is no longer capable of representing the American public. So who knows? We might be seeing the birth of new political parties, of a viable third party option, of an independent party, whatever. But I think American democracy is vibrant. But there's going to have to be a revolution, the kind of that Bernie's talking about, the kind that Donald Trump seems to be pushing forward, a revolution that says we're sick and tired of the status quo, and it's time things need to change, and change in a way that benefits we the people, not the handful of elites at the top.
Amen, brother. And it's been cooking, it's been building, and if it's not taken care of in this cycle, it's going to be even stronger in the next. And Scott. The way I see it is that elite has gotten, or I call them oligarchs, have gotten so powerful as they shift from national dominance to global dominance. One wonders, are they going to back down like they did during the Great Depression? When they had to create the American middle class to regain loyalty and legitimacy and so forth. Something that they're wiping out now that there's no more Soviet Union. They feel they don't need it anymore. How do you feel? I mean, can we do this civilly through the political process? There was real fear in the 30s, the Red 30s. Roosevelt, in his inauguration speech, had to tell us there was nothing to fear but fear itself. That's what he was talking about. How hard do you think the elites are going to hang on, or you think they'll be sensible?
Well, I mean, first of all, I absolutely believe that whatever change is going to occur, and I do believe there will be great change, is going to happen peacefully through nonviolent action at the polls. I believe in American democracy. I believe that the will of the people will be heard. It's not going to be quick, though. That's one of the frustrating realities of this form of democracy, is that it isn't going to happen overnight. It may not even happen this election cycle. It may not happen the next election cycle. But, we have historical momentum right now shifting away from these grounded elites and back toward the people. The elites will, of course, scratch and hold on to what they have, try to play their cards to their best advantage, and they never will totally go away. But I do believe that we will see an empowerment of the middle class, and we will see a re-legitimization of the American legislative branch. Congress, which has been just totally ineffective in the last couple decades. Hopefully, the people will start electing people to office who represent their will and not the will of special interests. That'll translate into a better Senate, and that'll translate into a better executive branch. And when you start getting,
Scott, if I may, before you go too much further, I wanted to comment. I disagree. I think that the Congress has been extremely effective, except they've been effective for 0.01% of the population. I caution everybody. If it was truly broken for everybody, it would have been fixed already. But it's only broken for the vast majority, right?
No, and I don't disagree. But I also understand the basic math. And no matter how rich you are, when you go to the polling, you got one vote. Now, if you can make your money give you more votes and more votes, so be it. But at the end of the day, if I get more people to go to the polling station to vote for me as opposed to vote for the man with the money, I win the election. That's American math. And I might be naive, but I believe in that. And I honestly believe that we're moving to a phase in history where the American people aren't going to allow themselves to be bought off by special interests and not allow themselves to be cowed by disinformation. And rather than let corrupt political parties like the Republican Party and the Democratic Party as they currently exist select representatives for them, they'll start selecting their own representatives and voting them into power. And when they do that, I think they can breathe some fresh air into the, what has been a moribund legislature and executive.
And gridlock made to order, because A against B and the winner is C. A crucial part of that, and something that we've always been led to rely on, or believe we could rely on, is the media. And they've been facilitating this abomination. I think half of them are just stupid and they don't realize it. I think the other half just, think the public is so stupid they might as well take advantage and get that six-figure salary. What do you think about the media? You've had to deal with them. We only have about a little less than a minute left. Go ahead.
Well, look, the media is corporate owned, and that just speaks volumes. We're not talking about an independent media. We're talking about a media that reports to a board that is responsible to shareholders, which means their job is to make money, and you make money by supporting the empowered elites. You don't make money by supporting the middle class or the disenfranchised lower classes. So I think the media has been totally corrupted, mainstream media. I've lost all trust and faith in them.
Well, and their belief in them is down to about 6%, according to a recent article in the Huffington Post, only 2% above Congress. So anyway, Scott, listen, thank you so much for your service, both in the military as well as in the UN and to humanity and so forth. 8 books. That's extremely impressive. I'm going to get in contact with you. If you can have your publisher send me the latest one, I'll take a quick look at it and we'll get you back on to talk about that. How does that sound?
Sounds great.
And friends, Scott does not have a website. Do you have a Facebook or a Twitter or anything like that, Scott?
No, I'm just me.
Well, then here's what I'd like to propose. If any of our listeners would like to send their thoughts to Scott, just email me, info@innradio.com, and let me know, and I'll forward it on to Scott Ritter for you. How's that, Scott?
That sounds great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, and thanks for spending all this time with us, friends. Have a great weekend. That's another week for INN World Report Radio. We'll be back with another great show for you on Tuesday night. Thank you very much, and thanks again to Scott Ritter. It's been a long time, but we'll be having him back on sooner rather than later. Have a great night. Have a great weekend.